So hi everyone, I'm Lyn. I actually grew up in Pretoria, went to school there, studied at the University of Cape Town, did 4 years in Joburg, and then did what many of us did in those days, was taking a 2-year holiday, working holiday in the UK, and I actually just didn't come back because I got onto this amazing adventure of living in the UK, in Holland, in Hungary. I lived in Canada for about 2.5 years, and then spent a big chunk of time between Houston, Texas, and the Pacific Northwest in the US, and I'm now back in London. What I wanted to share with you today is really a framework for fearless authenticity. We're going to talk about authenticity first, and then get into more of the fearless side of things. It's really a model that many leaders use, not just students, in terms of reinventing their own personal brands and how they build that in business. The first is really, the anchor point is your origin story. So what do you take from yourself? What have you learned about yourself, and how do you build that into how you go into the world in business and in personal relationships? That, I work for Microsoft at the moment, so I'm between jobs, I'm on garden leave, but honestly, the world of AI is something people talk about all the time. And let me tell you, that origin story, no AI can define your origin story. It's all about you personally. How you apply that into your relationships and building relationships, really important, and then how do you amplify that? So when we get down to my personal origin story, one of my earliest memories growing up was building a jigsaw puzzle, and I built it with my grandmother, who's 104. She helped me prepare for this presentation today, and we argued about how many pieces that puzzle had, because I built it with her, and she told me it was 500, and I'm convinced it was 1,000. I did tell her she's 104, so my memory trumps, but it was probably 500. The reason I share that is this passion for puzzles was always, how do you solve problems, was actually what it came down to. And I've applied that throughout my whole life, and I think it influenced very heavily how I decided what I did in my career, which was going into coding and tech and kind of building huge, big computer technology systems for companies. The second thing that really defines who I am is Africa. I think we all underestimate what a huge competitive advantage it is being born here and on this continent, because what it means is we question everything. Nothing is the way it seems, nothing needs to be the way it seems, and you can really challenge every kind of thinking that's out there every single day. And then the last thing that really influences me very heavily is this whole concept of creativity. I spend my life coding and in logic and in technology, and it's very linear. And then I have a deep passion for contemporary art. I collect art. That piece is from my basement in London. It's a piece by Sizwe Koza, and all of my art in my house is from Africa, because I think that when you look at art, it evokes an emotion and it evokes a feeling. And for me, everyone has a different conversation about art and what it is. And I've always anchored my life and what I've done with businesses and business leaders by that Maya Angelou quote, which is, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And I embody that in everything that I do going forwards. Now, on that, how you feel, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, I came across this campaign that Coke ran. As students are going into freshman year at college in the US, they don't know each other, they want to make friends, they've got no basis. And so what Coke did was they landed vending machines across these campuses. But the difference was that you couldn't actually open the bottle. So you could open out, you could take a Coke, but in order to open the bottle, you had to go to somebody else with a bottle, start a conversation, put them together, and pair them out to open them. And I think that, to me, is just so beautiful in terms of bringing human experience into what it is and what people do. So they kind of focused on a pain point, help these young people going into college to start the first conversation. So conversations in building relationships are super duper important. And when I was working at Accenture, I made a huge milestone of promotion, and I had a mentor, because you always have people that influence you very heavily. And my mentor said to me, Lyn, how are you doing, and how's your team? And I said to him, Royce, honestly, I have the best team I've ever had. And he said to me, if that's the case, you've got the wrong team. And I said to him, what do you mean? Like, why? And he said to me, because if you like everyone, they're not challenging you, and they're not challenging the way you think. And also remember, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. so please use them proportionately. And I remember that for a long time, those two things. Then the next thing I wanted to bring to life is really, I think when we're having conversations, what people say and what they mean are not always the same thing. And so really digging deep to thinking through what is the conversation we're trying to have, what are people trying to say, and I try to come up with an example of where this had hit me kind of in amongst the eyes. And the best example I had was when I was working in the UK, you'd run these big teams, and I could give feedback to people, and I would always say, if I was you, I would think about maybe changing this, and have you maybe thought about considering this, and if I had to do it your way, I would do this. And they would all listen and go and embrace parts of it, never listen to me always, but embrace parts of it and put it into whatever work artifact or whatever we were doing. And then I worked over in Houston, Texas. And for the first 6 months, I used the same language. And I was like, well, if I was you, I would think about this. And honestly, nobody did anything. There was not a single suggestion I made that was baked into anything. And I went down a big path of, is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I have a different accent? What is it? And then I realized it was the words I was using. If I was you, none of them were me. And so they didn't have to actually apply it. And I adjusted my language, and it kind of cleared the floodgates in terms of what that was. So I share that because when people are talking, I think it's always important to double-click and think, what are they actually trying to say? The next point I wanted to make and share is I went and I worked in Hungary for 2 years, and it was early 2000s. And when I got there, I was working for the Hungarian oil company MOL, and we were doing the first listing on the New York Stock Exchange. And there were about 6 of us as expats. And we had translators that followed us around. So everyone had 2 translators. But I speak so quickly that the translators complained, and I had a team of 4. So I had 4, felt like bodyguards walking around with me. But the point I'm trying to make is that when I was in Hungary, I had to hone very different skills in terms of listening. And it wasn't listening with my ears, it was actually listening with my eyes. Because whoever was talking, and the voices and the language and what was being said in my head were totally disconnected, because there was a delay in terms of the translation. And so I could never read a room, because I just didn't know who was saying what. So I could never building a relationship when you're actually devoid of those things is really hard. And so I started honing an observational skill set around really reading a room and watching what people did. And so from that, I kind of evolved the 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth to 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth, and start using them proportionately. We had this really interesting conversation. I was speaking to the board about they did acquire Slovnaft, which is a Slovakian oil company, and I said you had to develop a big change management plan to do this and this and this. And everyone was wriggling, and I couldn't understand but I carried on. I went through, my points were valid and accurate, carried on wriggling. And then we stopped for a tea break, and one of the guys that worked for me came over to me and said, hey, Lyn, they're translating it wrong. They're saying change the management, not change management. And I said to him, Hendrik, could you not have stopped this earlier? I mean, we've been talking for 45 minutes, and all I've done is really make them angry. But culturally, because I was more senior than him, he wouldn't interrupt me or stop me. So honestly, the message and the lesson I got from that was just trust your gut, because they shouldn't have been wriggling to what I was saying for so much time. The next point I want to make is really always play it long. Do the right thing. I think if you want to build sustaining relationships, I think doing the right thing is always the best thing to do. And that sounds fairly academic, but I truly believe it. And a really good example of that was I was working in Canada. I was working for the Canadian oil company Suncor, a big oil and gas background. And we were doing a big supply chain logistics transformation program for them and keeping track of kit and where it all was. And the COO at the time asked me to come up with him up to the mines and up to the mining sites. And whilst I loved living in Canada, it snows. The ski season is 8 months, and it's 8 months because it snows for 8 months of the year. So it's a freezing place. I always laugh and joke and say no religious text, no matter what you believe in, does any God ever talk about snow. So I don't think anyone was meant to live in that degree of cold. But even more than that, we got up there, and I was driving with Mark, and I said to Mark, I think I've been ripping you off, because actually really all you need is a roof over your yard, because everything is buried under snow. And we don't need all this computer tech to track it. We just literally need to build a roof over it. And to this day, Mark sends me a Christmas card, and he's always like, have you broken the grass roof? Have you blown the roof off? So that just very genuine feedback has stood me in a lot of stead. The last point on this slide is really, I love Coldplay, and I love the band, and I was fortunate enough to be in Wembley last week. I wasn't on any Kiss Cam, thank God. But I love the way that what they do in their fan experience is really bringing people very intimately and co-collaborating on how they build music videos and content and feedback. So that's another way of just really building your relationships differently. Look, I work in big tech, and we live in the world of AI, and I always get asked, what do we do? How do you do it? How do you go about this, Lyn? Where do you start? And this comes to this whole amplification, like how do you get your message out there and amplify it across? And the way I always answer this is I always say, with AI and with the world as it is today, really, all we need to do is exactly what we do today, but a little bit differently. So whether you are doing a first brief, I do a lot of work with Kantar in the UK, and putting first strategies and first market research papers out there, using these tools to kind of get you to first flow is really important, and it's not scary. It just really changes the way we think about solving problems. So that, for me, is really important. I love the conversations earlier in terms of noise. I think we need to focus very heavily on scaling empathy and not noise. But to bring that down to a very practical recommendation, I think we need to be very selective about what we scale in this whole scaling empathy. And the best example I have of that is, as a kid, I loved music, and I loved buying CDs, but I had to save, so what I bought, I had to really love, because I couldn't just have access to everything. And over the last few months, I've looked at my Spotify playlists, and they're crazy. I mean, I'm not sure I have a playlist, because there are thousands of them. So I'm completely, totally, and utterly not selective in what I do. And so I think as we're building relationships, who you spend time with, what you talk about, where you spend your time is really important. The last point I'm going to make on this is something I use very often to explain how the world of AI and the world of tech works. And the way I explain it is, I say to people that, and boards specifically, that I find it unbelievable that mankind managed to put a man on the moon before we put a wheel on a suitcase. And I know that's true, because I wasn't alive when man was put on the moon, and as a consultant and traveler running around the world, I was very definitely alive when we put a wheel on a suitcase. And flying up here, you notice just how that little wheel on a suitcase has changed an entire industry, whether it's baggaging, whether it's payment of tickets, whether it's measuring bags, how big your bag can be, how you incentivize people. So that wheel on a suitcase has really changed the world, in my opinion, a lot more than man on the moon, but lots of scientists will correct me on a lot of discoveries that have been made since then. So the thing that I want you to take away from this in terms of amplifying in a world that changes as much as it does is that I truly don't think you can think your way into a new way of acting today. I think you have to act your way into a new way of thinking. You have to do, and you have to build relationships, and you have to go out there and do it by feeling and not by thinking, because these machines and models think on our behalf much faster than we can. So what we're left with is just the humanity of who we are in terms of how we go about that. So really, the three takeaways are, what is your origin story? What influences what you've done? Trust is the outcome in terms of building relationships, really important, and then platforms to connect. And I think an example of a platform like that is literally this event that we're all at. The number of relationships and how you can amplify and get your voice out there is really powerful. So I say, what authentic story will you dare to tell as you kind of progress? And to be honest, the story I told today would not have been the story I would have told 6 months ago or even a year ago. So these things are constantly evolving. So what that means is that being fearless, you have to continue learning and continue exploring things. So I think that exploring and stepping into the unknown is really, really important. Continuously learning, continuously stretching yourself in what it is, investigating, listening deeply, and asking very bold questions, and then actually iterating on that continuously to make sure that you know where you're going and what kind of perspective you want to land in the world. So I think it's a continuous exercise. You don't write a personal brand story and leave it. You visit it every 6 months and do it over and over again. So what I want to leave you with is that I do think authenticity is our moonshot. I've been involved over the last few months in a lot of school leavers looking at job shadowing and what should they do and where should they go. And I had a conversation with my nephew who's 16, and I said to him, Jono, everyone today graduates, even at 16 years old, you're basically an MBA student, because you can pump into a model, whether it's Gemini, whether it's ChatGPT or whatever, you can pump into an AI algorithm and say, what should the strategy of X be? Here are the perspectives, what should it be? Your intelligence is no longer really a differentiator. Who you are and who you are as a human being is your differentiator. So I just close with saying that we once dared to put a man on the moon. I think that what we need to do is dare to be different and dare to ask the questions and continuously evolve, and that gives you the rocket power to actually fuel your own moonshot in whatever you do. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you very much.